For me to go to other countries and be with the people and live with them and see their culture is just about one of the most exciting things I can do. And each time I have a journey like that, I'm opened up to more of myself.
My mom just takes life on. She's not the kind of person that lets circumstances control her, and she's not defeated.
One of my mom's many mottos is, life is a daring adventure or nothing at all.
She's just this incredible, vibrant, courageous force that's just been with us for, of course, as long as I can remember.
The greatest lesson that travel has taught me is that we're all one. I was 17 years old. I had graduated from high school, and I absolutely had no direction. I had no idea what I was going to do. I got a job at Sears Roebuck, and that was very depressing. And about that time, I read an article in the paper about students bicycling across Europe for very little money. So I saved $500 and I took off, and all of my clothes were packed in a laundry bag. And I got to Hamburg, bought a bicycle, and 3 days later threw it down the hill. And then I started hitchhiking. Europe was very inexpensive at that time. The youth hostels were only 25 cents a night in the north and 50 cents a night in the south. And food was very inexpensive. So I managed to live on about $1 a day. I also had jobs. I worked at the USO for a period of time. Really, the kind of money I made was just to sustain myself. And I worked at a library, an American library in Madrid. And I was a dishwasher in Casablanca, of all places. And so I sustained myself. And then I think I might still be over there had I not gotten very, very sick. And because I was underage, the consulate made me go home. Cambodia had just opened up to the West. It was very, very depressing. And I remember going to a hotel that was a cheap hotel and asking myself, why did you do this? Why did you come here? I don't want to be here. I want to go home where it's safe and it's comfortable. And I didn't feel safe in Cambodia. And then I said to myself, Carolyn, don't do it. This is your chance. Stay and make something happen. I came upon a very small restaurant that was surrounded by greenery and palm trees. So of course I went in. I asked somebody if there was anybody here that would know where I could get information about sun bears. The sun bears are smaller bears that are absolutely adorable, and they are very well known, especially by the Chinese, as food for their virility. So they capture these bears and they torture them. And as it turned out, these people were involved in sun bears. And he said, I've got the man for you. You can ask this man. I told this man that I was a freelance writer and that I was going to write a story about him and the bears. That was my way into this group. So they embraced me and began to tell me their stories. They had big motorcycles, they had tattoos all over their bodies, and they were tough. Randy told me how he first got involved. He was at a restaurant, a Chinese restaurant, and they were about ready to torture this bear to eat. And Randy was astonished. He'd never seen that before, and so he bought the bear before they were able to cut off its paws and feet. That's what they do. They cut off the paws and feet so they'll really suffer, and then they stick them in boiling water and watch them die. It's absolutely horrific. He takes the bear home, and the bear ends up living with him for a couple of years. The bear even sleeps in his bed. What he did was buy a piece of property on the Mekong Delta and built a refuge for those bears. It came the day to release the bears. The bears were rolled out, and all three of those men were standing there crying. These men with these big tattoos and these motorcycles, these tough men, were like kittens. It was actually 1978 that Ernie and I decided to go to Peru. I had gotten a letter in the mail that was advertising a trip on the Urubamba River, and that name sounded so exciting to me that I thought it has to be fantastic. I remember Ernie was out in the backyard, and I ran out there and I said, Ernie, we're going to the Urubamba River. He said, great, let's go. Anyway, we went. We had a wonderful experience. We had a short hike and some river rafting. And here I met Randall, who was one of the foremost explorers of that area. I asked him to be our guide in '79, and he agreed to do it. It took me a year to get ready to go. It would be a first for my kids. We had no experience in adventure traveling or backpacking. I had to learn about trekking clothes, what to take in warm weather, cold weather, how to backpack. But I also made all of our food, tons of beef jerky, and I dried a lot of fruit, and we took that. My girls and I took basic mountaineering training. We took Red Cross. I was with my 3 children and a nephew of mine. The 5 of us took out into the unknown and trekked around this area. And we had absolutely incredible experiences. We slept primarily in tents. We had all of our own pots and pans and our stoves to cook with. We were completely self-reliant. We came upon villages that were obviously very, very poor. And the people all came out to greet us, always, brought us into their huts and shared their boiled potatoes. These experiences had a profound effect on every one of these kids. That's why we traveled very cheaply and went to the kind of underbellies of the cities, because I wanted to expose them to what most of life was like in the world. We met a herder, and there was a little bit of conversation between the guide and the herder. And the guide said, hey, do you want some meat? And yeah, we want meat. We haven't had meat in days. So right before our eyes, the herder turns the sheep upside down and cuts its stomach open. And we were shocked beyond belief. Leon, my nephew, threw up. My other kids swore up and down they would never eat meat again. And it was a horrible, horrible scene. So they packed this meat on the back of a horse. The pony men rubbed garlic and something else on these sheep. And so they marinated in the sun on these back of these horses for about 5 days. And then they cooked the meat one evening, and we devoured it. We took a train from Ayacucho to Lima. We get on the train, we get our seats, we're all nestled in, we're fine. And then the train makes a stop, and hordes and hordes and hordes of people come in. We're sitting on potatoes. People have given us babies to take care of. There was not a lot of fresh air to breathe. There's a hotel, Hotel Europa. There was a big line to get into the hotel, and we had just been on the 16-hour train ride. We were exhausted. And a man came out and said, I've got one room with 5 beds. And I said, oh, that's me. The room, the floor was black, so we were black all the time. And the girls and I went in to take a shower, and when you turned the water on, roaches came out of the drain. And there was also sputum and hairs on the side of the walls. And it was really gross. So when I say we stayed in inexpensive hotels, that's what I'm really talking about.
In Peru, it just seemed that my mother was interested in going to where all of the danger was happening. That's just sort of what she did.
The teachers had been on strike for some time.
People were protesting. There was a lot of excitement and action and marches in the streets.
There were more people joining, and there was a lot more political action.
There were tanks going down the road, and she decided to follow them because that's what my mom did. That's where the excitement was.
Tanks started pouring into Lima in order to control the crowds. But it seemed like it was almost a party.
As a 14-year-old girl, it was very exciting to run along with the protesters and be a part of this movement, even though I'm not sure how much I understood it.
A lot of people started following, and there were more tanks.
People were singing, doing all kinds of crazy things. So we thought, what the hell, we'll follow the tanks too. So we did. But we followed it on a night that was too bad for us because we actually got stung with some of the tear gas.
We sort of realized, I think, the severity of the situation, and there were some shop owners.
They came out of their shops and they dragged us into their shops and covered us until the tanks rolled out. That was very touching.
I remember just lying there for what seemed like a couple of hours. But my mom was so darn excited the whole time because we were just at the crest of what was going on in the city, in the country at that time. And you know, again, wherever the excitement was, that's where she was.
So we've been in Peru for about a month now, and the kids are worn out and they want to go home.
I remember we were pretty tired. She wanted to do another trek, and she found some guy on the streets who was able to, or interested in taking us up this particular mountain in a different part of Peru.
I convinced them that we should go to the north, with the Huascaran area, that has magnificent mountains, and at least do one more trek.
It was myself and my sister and brother and my cousin. We all put on our packs, and we didn't have porters this time.
Anyway, we climbed and climbed for a couple of days. We reached the summit, and the summit was magnificent because on the other side of the summit was this magnificent lake. It was breathtaking. And the guide said, "I'm leaving. I'll be back in a few days." But Jorge, you can't leave. You know, we don't know how to do this by ourselves.
We're up there on this mountain, and we were alone. And my mom remembers that time as being pretty dangerous in terms of not having anybody around.
But in the meantime, Leon had altitude sickness, and I was scared to death about that. So I was trying to treat that so that he wouldn't get too sick. And I was successful at doing that. But it comes around to dinner, and my stove doesn't work.
Apparently we had this stove, and my mother needed to get the stove going because it was getting cold and we needed something warm.
And I've never fixed a stove in my life. It was a very complicated camping stove, but I knew that I had to do something because we had to eat, and everything that we had to eat had to be cooked.
I figured, okay, we'll get the stove going. Sure, we'll get the stove going because my mother, being all-powerful, you know, the incarnation of every superhero you can imagine, will make the stove work.
So I got that stove out and I fixed that damn stove, and I'll tell you, it was one of the greatest accomplishments of my life. I was walking with a fellow trekker in the Himalayas who had been absolutely every place in the world. And I asked him, "Where would you go next?" And he said, "Irian Jaya. It's the most remote place in the world." When I came home, I started looking up Irian Jaya and decided to go because it sounded absolutely fascinating. I was planning on going myself, but my daughters wouldn't even think of that. They were determined to go with me. So the three of us started planning this Irian Jaya trip.
She's always been interested in the unfamiliar. She's always been interested in different people. She seeks to come out of her comfort zone and be challenged either physically or spiritually or emotionally. It's an insatiable curiosity about differences.
It was another incredible trip. It was probably one of the most incredible because of the fact that the people lived so primitively, and that my mother, of course, decided to go to that place.
People got wind that we were taking this trip from far away and actually called us on the telephone and pleaded with us not to go, that you'll be in trouble if you go, you're not safe if you go. But I had also talked to some missionaries who said, it's okay, you can come. At the astonishment of my friends and family, we left for Irian Jaya. Irian Jaya is the easternmost part of Indonesia and the western half of New Guinea. It's difficult to get there.
We flew in a little putt-putt plane, and it was in the middle of nowhere. And we got off this 3-seater plane to be greeted by these natives.
And it's the first time that I think any of us had culture shock. The men wore penis gourds that I had never seen before, and the women wore grass skirts.
The penis gourds were longer for some men, depending on how powerful they were in the particular tribe. And I also never knew how they got them on and how it felt, because it looked pretty darn uncomfortable.
Everyone was essentially naked, and it was hard to take our eyes off of those penis gourds. Some of them were so long that you were afraid they were going to stab you. But I saw a little, what looked like a tea house across from the little airport, and I went over there and knocked on the door and said, would you by any chance know of a man named John Wolfe? And he said, I'm John Wolfe. And John Wolfe happens to be the foremost explorer of that whole area. And so I told him what we were up to. And he says, you're crazy, you can't do that. It's not possible. And I talked to him for a long time, and I finally convinced him to help us get together a party and take us on this trek.
This was hard because it was in the jungle, and because it was muddy.
There's 180 different varieties of snakes in Irian Jaya, and they're all poisonous. So when we first started out on the trek, we had palm leaves that we were going like that on the ground too, because we didn't want to get bit by a snake. We crossed rivers and realized that our legs were just filled with leeches, and so we were peeling off the leeches. But our worst enemy was the mud. We were in mud constantly. Every day we were in mud, sometimes up to our knees. It was really a hard trip, and at times we didn't think we were going to survive.
Hiking through the jungles and being wet all the time and exhausted and having leeches stuck to your legs and not knowing where you're going to sleep that night, and many times we got lost. It was miserable.
We all realized what kind of a situation we were in, so we tried very hard to cooperate with one another.
We all needed to depend on each other and work as a team, and all of us have different strengths, so we were each able to bring something to the table.
We made a deal that if there was some kind of a decision to be made, that two had to be for it in order to go along with it.
The three of us did very well together in that we all looked out for each other, and when one or two of us was really at the end of our rope for the day and exhausted and felt like we couldn't go on and felt like we didn't know where to go, the other one would pick up, and take on sort of, the leadership role. We
took care of each other in ways that we've never taken care of each other before. One of the things that happened to me was that I felt that my roles with my daughters really had changed. In the past, I had done most of the taking care of and the arranging, and now they were taking charge and they were arranging, and they were making decisions, and they were dealing with things probably much better than I would have dealt with things. I told Jennifer that I'm going to pinch myself so hard and that I'll leave a scar there forever that it will remind me to never, ever, ever do anything like this again. And at some point in time, we were sitting in a field eating rice, and Jennifer said, "You don't have to squeeze yourself, just cut off your arm." That's how miserable we were. And we wanted the trek to end, but we still had miles and miles to go. Every morning, we took hold of hands, and we asked the friendly spirits of the earth to please give us the courage and the strength to get through this. We were in situations sometimes that were really life-threatening. There were rope bridges that went across raging rivers, and the rope bridges had holes in them.
My mom, her attitude was, we don't really have a choice. This is where we are, and we have to cross this footbridge to get to where we're going. You had to walk on these thin rails, one after another, where you could fall into rivers or the jungle far below, and walking across these bridges, holding on for dear life on either end and trying to step so carefully and being afraid that the slat of wood was going to hold your weight, and the bridge swaying with your weight and in the wind was one scary experience. At one point I did fall through the footbridge, and I was hanging on, and my mom turned around and she had a walking stick in one hand, and she pulled me up with her left hand, and all she said was, "Oh honey." And we kind of made it across the footbridge, and then we both broke down and cried. We became really overwhelmed with really how dangerous it was.
There was another time that in order to get from one place to another, we had to climb down a sheer granite wall. It had a bamboo ladder on it, but the bamboo was slippery from the moisture. But the tribes people, mind you, there was 6 of them and 3 of us,
helping us down these sheer rocks. And at one point, taking me, here I am, I'm 5'10", and these guys were maybe 5 feet, and they're helping me down this rock with penis gourds and bare feet. That was, again, sort of the absurdity and the craziness of that trip and why it was so incredible.
We were so impressed because of their seemingly loyalty to us and their concern about taking care of us.
We did a lot of hiking there between villages.
We would walk with the kids and we would start singing, and the kids would all follow us from that particular village, and they'd accompany us from one village to the next village, singing with us. You know, a lot of these people had never seen white people before.
And they were absolutely fascinated with us. And it really was to the point where we had no privacy. We would set up our little tent, and you know, you couldn't even go outside to go pee, because as soon as you opened up the tent, there were crowds of people around just very interested in us and wanting to see something, I guess, that they hadn't seen before.
There was a large village, I think the largest village we'd ever seen. And we stayed there the night. We got up in the morning to eat. Usually our breakfast was rice, and there was no rice. And our porters told us that the people that lived in the community ate it all. I told them that they had to give us something. They had to substitute some food for the rice. And they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't share their potatoes with us. So we had to trek about 3 days to get to a missionary station where there would be a phone. And we phoned in for food. We had the missionary planes drop the food in a particular spot so that we had enough food to eat. The girls and I often wondered, did they really steal the food? Was it stealing to them, or did they just feel that it's food and everybody's entitled to the food? And they really were incredibly decent, hospitable people. And we thought of the pristine land that we were in, and knowing that in a few years it would probably be cut down by the oil men.
We went to Fiji and we started off on a tourist bus.
We rode on that bus for hours and hours.
There was my mother and Ernie and my brother and my sister and my cousin.
There was a man sitting in the front of the bus. He was a very large man, and he had nothing to say the whole bus trip. But at the end of the bus trip, he stood up and said, "I will take you to my island, and I am the king of the island. I'm King Ratu."
And before I knew it, she had made friends with a chief of the village.
The women were ordered to go in canoes. And we put our gear in canoes, and we got in the canoes, and the canoes sank.
We were rowing to his village that was an island.
The men were given palm leaves, and the palm leaves were on fire, and they used that for light to get through the jungles. So my son, who was young at the time, had that thrill. It took us probably an hour to get there by boat and through the jungle. And the Fijians were quite surprised to see us. But immediately they greeted us with kava.
And we stayed with him for several days, and they did all kinds of dances for us, and we drank illicit drinks.
We didn't know it, but they were cleaning up this hut for us. It was a massive hut. And so we ate and we celebrated, and they said we were welcome to stay there. Ratu was the name of the king. He invited us to go to an island on his boat. So we all get in the boat and we go to this island, and it takes us about 6 hours to get to this island. And the island is magnificent. You can walk all around the island, and it is filled with these magnificent birds with white feathers. And the storm came up, and we kept asking Ratu, "Isn't it time to go? We should go." Soon after, he announced for everybody to get in the boat. So we all obeyed him. We got in the boat, and this horrible storm hit us.
Clouds started forming, the thunderheads started going off, and all of a sudden we started hitting these swells.
The waves got bigger and bigger until they became huge.
I remember the storm hitting, and I remember the waves. I remember how big the waves were.
These were huge swells, probably 20 to 25 feet, and that is no exaggeration.
And even the fishermen that went with us on the boat were looking at us like, they were really worried. And as they were worried, we knew we were in trouble.
The Fijian captain would stop the engine, and we'd go up and boom, bounce back down, go up, boom, bounce back down.
Every time we plunked down, it was as if the boat was going to fall to pieces.
We all got together and decided what we were going to do if the boat went down. And the first thing we went for were we did have life jackets, and we had swim fins. So we gathered up our life jackets and our swim fins, and we paired off and decided that if the boat went down, we would hold hands. We would try to stay together as much as we could. And we knew it was a shark-infested waters. And I never I really didn't think we were going to survive. I thought we were going down. We were so far from any kind of shore, so far from any kind of help, no radio, dark. I was terrified. I pounded on Ratu's back. I went up to him and I started hitting him like this, and I said, "Take us back, take us back." I wanted to go back to the island. And he didn't budge. He didn't say a word. He didn't flinch. I remember Jonathan sitting next to me, and he said, "I'm too young to die. I don't want to die. I'm too young to die."
Literally, as a small child, inside with my mom, thinking that this is it, that this is the end of our lives, we are going to die.
And the girls were passed out on the bottom of the boat that was filling with water.
My cousin, myself, and my sister, I think, were throwing up about every 5 minutes because we all got so seasick.
And my cousin Paul, who had been in the Army or Navy or something, taking buckets and trying to get the water out of the boat.
This was the only time that I felt that perhaps we might not make it. I didn't see how we could.
But even then, it was exciting. It was really exciting, and it never occurred to me that we weren't going to be okay.
I had met a couple of women who were very interested in going to India with me. At the last minute, they kind of pooped out and didn't go. And I was so disappointed, I decided, what the heck, I'll try it myself. When I arrived in Delhi, I'd been on a plane for 26 hours. I was exhausted, but I was too riled up to sleep. And I think it's because I was scared. I had never been in India by myself before.
Hell, I'm scared to travel to some of these places, and she's able to go. She goes out and she experiences the culture and she experiences the life that these people live. And a lot of people would be very scared to do that. And I think that she does it because the rewards are so enormous.
I got to Kashmir, but when I got to Kashmir, I had to arrange my own trek. I had a guide and I had 2 ponymen. We had to drive in a car to get to the trailhead. And as we were driving, there were more and more men that were hopping onto the car. And I thought, well, this is just the Indian way. And, you know, pretty soon they were on the running boards, they were everywhere. And they were laughing and looking at me. You know, there's something going on here that I don't like. So I felt I had lost my power. And what was I going to do? I'm out here in no man's land. There's nobody to help me. There's no other women. So I ordered the car to stop, and the car did stop. And I went away from the car, and I demanded from my guide that he talk with me. I told him that I did not like what was happening. I wanted those men out of the car, and if he didn't put them out of the car, I was going to go back to Srinagar and find another guide. So with this, he went back and talked to the men, and there was a lot of back and forth conversation. The men did not want to get out of that car. And they were very, very angry with me.
When she, with all of her soul and energy, believes in something, she will not back down from her position.
Finally, we got rid of the men. And I got back in that car and felt very triumphant.
Her greatest strength is her ability to do anything she decides to do.
It was a feeling almost of empowerment, I might call it, because I realized that I was able to reach down and pull something from myself that I never knew that I had, and that would make me safe.
She refuses to be defeated by the challenges that she faces, and she always picks herself up and perseveres.
After that, I made rules for our trekking together, and I was very tough, and I was very much of a bitch. And I didn't want to behave that way, but in that situation with these Muslim men, that was demanded of me. We're trekking in an area where the nomads were bringing their herds down from the mountains. And so I traveled with the nomads now and again, and they were magnificent people. The women were gorgeous, and they rode on these tall, magnificent horses, and they had their jewelry and their colorful clothes, and I just about went out of my head. It was so exciting. On the trail, we meet Mohammed, and Mohammed asks us in for dinner. Mohammed is a very rich man, or a very rich nomad, because his tent is huge and it's different colors. It's white, blue, and yellow, I think. So we go into the tent and we sit down around Mohammed, and on the other side of the tent there are a group of women who are wearing their veils and will not look at me, but every once in a while they'll take a peek. And Mohammed says, "These are my 17 wives." And I said to him, "You know, Mohammed, in the United States, if a man had 17 wives, a woman would be entitled to 17 husbands." And he said, "But madam, you don't understand. A woman could not take care of 17 husbands." And I said, "No, Mohammed, you've got it backwards. It's a man who couldn't take care of 17 wives." And they got it. Mohammed, his face blew up. It was red. And I didn't know whether he was going to slap me or what, but he suddenly burst out laughing. And so everybody in the tent laughs.
My mom has a huge amount of charisma and a huge amount of passion. And she's able to inspire passion in other people. And in that way, she's larger than life.
Everybody in the tent is hysterical, and these women come over to me and they pull me over to their fire where they're making tea and chapati. And for the rest of the time that I was with them, I spent with the women. And that was an exhilarating experience for me. And those are the kinds of experiences I continue to have on this trek with Kashi, and especially the nomads coming down.
Having the experience of travel and being able to do it by yourself, that was an important part that I took from my mom. That if I were able to be alone and go to any part of the world alone, I could really do anything.
Jennifer, Jonathan, and I decided to go to northern India and do a trek that was from Manali to Leh. It was another very difficult trek. And unless you were in very good shape, it was suggested that you don't go.
I was scared to leave, and I was scared to leave for 8 weeks to be on this adventure, but I decided that it was important enough to go. And I don't know what it was. It was my mom's kind of saying, "Hey, let's do this," but it was also something else in the universe that made me do this. And I went.
We get in a plane, we land in Delhi at 2 o'clock in the morning, and we have to get to Manali, which is about a 13 or 14-hour drive. There were no cars, there were no taxis, there was nothing, but I felt that something would come up if we just hung around. And sure enough, we met somebody who was willing to take us to Manali. We had to pay him $200. It was a hairy trip. I think it was the most scary part of the trip because of the roads. Every 10 feet, it seemed, there was a truck that had gone off the road, or a car that was down in the ravine. Anyway, we get to Manali and we start our trek. And I can honestly say that I have never seen John so exhilarated. He had not been to India or Asia with me before, and he had no idea what he was in for.
India was an amazing place. I mean, it's an amazing place. And we went on this 6-week trek in the mountains where we hiked 12, 13, 14 hours a day.
And we were going through barren mountains. There was a point where we could stop and have something to eat, the usual dal bhat. But there was music playing, and the music echoed all over the mountains, and it was Indian music, and it just did something to you. You know, you knew you were in India.
We were so fortunate. We were just so fortunate, and it was all because of her energy and her passion that she shared with us, and it's been such a gift.
To be with my sister Jennifer and my mom, we bonded and we had such a great time, and we laughed and we became so much more close. And during such hardships, relationships tend to become so much more deep. And that's what happened with my mom and my sister.
It took us 3.5 weeks to do that trek. We went over 9 passes that were higher than 16,000 feet.
To be walking and walking and walking and doing something that's extremely physically difficult was a huge therapeutic session for me. It really was.
The horses had to cross the river, and the river was particularly high that year. The porters get the horses in the river, and the horses lose control. They start going downstream, and we were all hysterical. We were running down the river, calling the horses, and even some of the porters jumped in the water and tried to guide the horses to safety. They managed to get all of the horses back. So we loaded up the horses and started up the mountain, and a horse fell through some ice, and the horse had an enormous amount of weight on his back, and we thought for sure he would be injured badly, but we did get the horse out.
I remember during the hike wanting it to be over so bad because it was so hard. And my mom is 50 years old doing the same thing I am, but it was so incredibly hard. And at the end of this hike, knowing that this was the last day of our hike, starting to cry because it was just such an incredible time for me.
When we finished the trek, the last day was in a village called Lamaruyu. The only way to get there was to, find your own way. Essentially, it was hitchhiking with a truck. The ride was amazing. It was one of the highest roads in India, and the trucks, when they went around the curve, we were all terrified. And then they were all smoking opium, these truck drivers. And I think we got a whiff of the opium and so relaxed and settled down. But now I'm wondering if it wasn't all in our head, because the Indians do smoke other things than opium. We wanted to get back to Srinagar. We either had to go by land, which was almost impossible because of the snow, or we had to take a plane, but because of the political situations, the planes were hard to get. We did manage to get a plane to Srinagar that would take us back to Delhi. And as we entered the airport, we had soldiers running up to our car, taking out all of our gear, and we had walking sticks in our bags. In the bags, they looked like guns, and they actually pointed the guns at us until they opened up the bags and found that they were just trekking sticks. But that was a pretty terrifying moment. The interesting thing is, we got to the airport, the plane didn't come, we waited for hours and hours, and John ended up making friends with every soldier in that airport. He taught them card tricks, and they played cards, and it was just a big old party until we got out of there.
What I remember is coming back to the States after that period of time and being a totally and completely different person. There was a different energy about me. There was a different aura about me.
For years, I had been reading about an area in Pakistan that sounded very, very exciting. It was the Baltoro Glacier, and it was considered to be the most difficult trek to take in that part of the world. And Jennifer and I decided that we would try it.
There's something about when my mom and I travel together, we gel together very well. She's very easygoing, and I'm very easygoing. And it's sort of what is, it is, and we can get through this.
We were told that we would be very harassed and that it was dangerous for us to be there. And 2 women alone, it was out of the question and blah, blah, blah. Well, we flew to Pakistan, Lahore, and the moment we got off the plane, we went to a market and bought ourselves a Shalimar kameez. Those are the outfits that the Indians wear with a scarf over their head. And we absolutely had no problems at all. It was interesting though, because we were the only women on the street. We never saw any other women. We dealt the whole time with men. I went to the tourist office to get my trekking permit. The guy behind the desk said, "You cannot go to the Baltoro Glacier." Well, why not? Because you're too old. You're too old and it's too difficult. You may not go. And I talked to him about all the experiences that I had had and that I was very well prepared to go. So we talked him into a permit, and we were ready to go. We went to village where we picked up our porters. So we got the porters together, we got set up, and we were on our way. And it was a very frightening trek. It was indeed a glacier. It was all ice. And you had to be very careful where you walked because there were so many ice crevices. So Jennifer and I obviously were very alert the whole time. It was cold, we could never get warm because we were sleeping on ice. During that time, we passed a few other trekkers, but for the most part, we were on that glacier by ourselves. A group moved in near us, and it turned out to be the British expedition that was climbing all of the summits in that area. Mind you, this is the K2 area. They have some of the tallest mountains in the world. They asked us for dinner, and we had dinner, and they said, "Hey, why don't you go over Gondogorla with us?" Gondogorla is a summit. Jennifer said it's 22,000 feet. I thought it was a little less than 20,000 feet. And we told them that we'd never had any experience before with technical climbing and that we couldn't do it. And they said, "Not to worry, we'll help you. We've got the gear, we've got the ropes, and you can do it." So we got our crampons and listened to them very carefully about how to do it, and the next morning we left. But one of the things that I'll always remember, at 2 o'clock in the morning, the porters and the climbers and everybody involved with climbing Gondogorla got up and got ready to go. And before we started walking, we all held hands and sang a song. And I was told that the song had something to do with God keep us safe. And it was very, very touching, really touching. The British ended up about 3 hours ahead of us because they went over the crevices and staked out the crevices before we came, which was a very decent thing for them to do. And indeed, we did climb Gondogorla. And I think that we were so terrified that we weren't aware of how exhausted we were. We made the peak and we were absolutely exhilarated. Pakistani men were really very, very interesting. First of all, they were all very handsome. More handsome than the women were beautiful. Jennifer and I went to a restaurant to eat, and there were some men, of course there's always just men, no women, men sitting across from us who tried to get our eye, but we completely ignored them. We went back to our hotel, and when we left our hotel again later that day, they were waiting for us. Everywhere we were, everywhere we looked, there they were. So ultimately, we began talking to them, and they were carpet salesmen, and they just were not going to let us get away without buying a carpet. They were brothers. One of the brothers' name was Jawed, and Jawed was very, very funny, and we laughed and laughed all the time.
Because Pakistan being, primarily a Muslim country, we didn't have the opportunity to meet very many women. We were always meeting the men, of course. The Pakistani people sort of touched our hearts.
As we went through Pakistan, there didn't seem to be anybody who didn't know who we were and didn't know every move that we had made.
The thing about that trip was my mother and I laughed constantly. We were always laughing, and we were always finding ourselves in the most absurd positions with these people.
We had a knock on the door once, and it was a man who said that Jawed sent me, I'm his friend, and he wanted me to take you to blah, 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 so you could do this and do that. So we thought, oh, fine, we'll do it. Well, it turns out that he knew of Jawed and he knew of us there. He had no relationship with Jawed at all. But we spent time with this man. We went into a restaurant and he told us his story. And his story was that he was an outcast in his village in Pakistan because of being a heroin addict. And most of his family had moved to Kashmir. He wasn't allowed to go to Kashmir. Of course, he had been hearing about the troubles that Kashmir and India were having, but he didn't realize that they were so serious. He went to Kashmir, met up with his brother, and they were out at night after curfew, and the soldiers came over and split his brother's gut open. And that's the story he told us. And he sat at that table and wept and wept and wept. This was a stranger who I think obviously had a great need to talk and tell us of his pain. There was incident after incident like that. Anytime that we told a Pakistani that we were psychologists, they said, I'm depressed. And it got to be funny, but they weren't being funny. They were very serious. They're depressed. So we would sit down to hear their troubles. And we heard an awful lot of troubles from an awful lot of men. Some of them even brought their wives to us because their wives were depressed and their wives weren't eating and they were worried about them and the wives wouldn't have sex with them anymore. So we got the wives together and we talked about all kinds of things. I don't know how much they understood or even how much we understood, but it was a very fascinating experience. In the meantime, Jennifer meets Kankashi, and he's a doctor, and he asks her out. And the first time that he asked her out, I told Jennifer I didn't think it was a good idea because it would be obvious to everyone that she was a tourist and he was a Pakistani man. Jennifer decided that she would go out in spite of my concerns.
My God, they were incredible people. They were such good people. They were such funny people. They said things, they did things, they found humor in the same kinds of things that my mother and I did.
Well, they fell in love, or he fell in love. I don't know what kind of love it was for Jennifer, but she seemed to have fallen in love as well. And this guy courted her and did all kinds of wonderful things for her. And we were getting ready to go back to India. And he came to our hotel room with a gun. And he said, Amma. I was always called Amma, not Mama, but Amma. If I don't see Jenny, I kill myself. My life is ruined. Amma, Amma, please. And he got on the floor and begged me, please let me see your daughter. I want to marry her. Please, Amma. And then he puts the gun to his head and he said, I kill myself if I can't see Jennifer. So I said, give me the gun, Kankashi, give me the gun. And he gave me the gun very willingly, and I went over and put it in a drawer. And then we talked about the issue, the problem. And he did go home finally, but that too was a very interesting situation. For some reason, we weren't afraid of that gun. I don't even think it was loaded, but I wasn't about to look. Kim and I went to Ladakh, and we decided to trek in that area. And we did for a couple of weeks. But after that, there were so many other trekkers on the trail that we wanted to go someplace that was more remote.
It was an area that had just opened up to tourism. It was along the Chinese border. It's a very deserted and mountainous region.
We got some guides and porters and we went there. It was a magnificent trek. There was nothing but rocks and sand. And every once in a while we'd come up on some nomads, but other than that, we saw no one.
We would visit these nomadic tribes and stay in their tents and drink tea and sing songs with the children and look at their colorful weavings and their way of life, and it was mind-blowing.
I was kind of sick most of the way, and at the end of the trek, there was an army base. Those are the only people that we saw. And we were told at the army base that we had been trekking at 16,000 feet. So that's why I was so tired. But Kimberly and I had a wonderful time together.
She's just someone that I have always been able to depend on. She's just someone that's always there.
I've been talking to my grandchildren for years about India. My oldest grandchild said, "Grandma, you've got to take us to India." And I said, "I'll take you to India when you're 7 years old." And every year she reminded me that she was getting closer to 7 years old. Well, at 7 years old, she said it's time. So I thought, it's time. So I started getting ready for this trip for India. And I had no idea that I would be able to pull it off because it was very complicated.
She made it happen. And that was so wonderful because the kids got to go to India, but they got to go to India with Grandma.
She really wanted to share her passion for India with her grandchildren. So she arranged for all of us and all of her grandchildren to take the Palace train.
The Palace train is a very luxurious train that the Maharajis and the very important people took this train.
This incredible train that goes all through Rajasthan. Every day you stop and you see these incredible palaces and the Taj Mahal, and you go on these adventures in jeeps through tiger reserves.
I had no idea how the kids would react to this trip. And I was pretty concerned about the fact that they would be too hot, they would be bored, it would be too disturbing to them.
She wanted to go and experience the culture and really get a sense of how the people live. That's what she wants to pass on to my children, and that's what I want to pass on to my children.
It was the most amazing experience I've ever had with the kids. One of the reasons it was amazing is that those children were so occupied with what they were seeing and what they were doing that there was never an incident. I don't think one of the kids cried. I don't think one of the kids at any time complained. You know, you get off the train in the morning and a bus takes you someplace, and you get off the bus and these elephants pick you up and put you on their back, and then you ride up about a mile up to a fort. And it's phenomenal, and the kids went out of their mind. We were in the desert at one point in time, and there was a camel safari. And we joined the camel safari, went a little ways with them. And it was a trip which was far more exciting and successful than I ever imagined. I think it's one of the best things I've ever done for the kids. I think it's something that is indelible in their minds. They'll never forget it.
I see, especially in my oldest daughter, Kaylee, this incredible independent spirit and this craving for adventure that has been passed down from my mom.
Every time I finished a trek, and I think for my children as well, we felt more adequate to do other things in our lives.
What has been so wonderful about my mom is that what she's encouraged us to do is not so much follow what she was driven by or what she was enthusiastic or passionate for, but really to pursue what's important to us, and for us to be able to pursue whatever passion that we might have.
Each one of my sisters, including myself, have been able to share this experience with her, and it's opened our eyes up to so much more and have made us better individuals.
She's made me who I am, and I'm so grateful to her for that.
Every one of them have felt that in some way it changed their life.
There's nobody like my mother. My mother will live on forever because of how incredibly powerful and courageous and unique she is.